So when is David Tepper going to fire Matt Rhule? I don't know. You guys keep asking me. I keep telling you. I don't have a clue. It's going to happen one day. Take a deep breath. It's not going to change the fact that the quarterback's terrible and you can't win without a quarterback in the NFL. But still, Matt Rhule is on borrowed time, and it probably needs to happen sooner rather than later, especially if they want to save the season that many of you think is over already. So today, on our Wednesday conversation, going to have a talk with Mike Kaye of the Charlotte Observer, new to the beat. Maybe he has some information on when Matt Rhule might be fired, because I certainly don't have a clue at this point in time.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure to watch the show and subscribe to the show over on our Locked On Panthers YouTube channel. You can also check us out wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Just be sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of Locked On Panthers. And follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where every single Friday I answer weekly Friday mailbag questions here on Locked On Panthers. Be a part of this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag on the show, either at me or DM me on Twitter at Julian Council. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. On today's edition of the Wednesday Conversations, which we'll do throughout the regular season here on Locked On Panthers, going to talk to new Carolina Panthers beat reporter Mike Kaye for the Charlotte Observer. He's been on the beat for about 2 weeks now, but he did come over from Pro Football Network. He's covered the Jags before. He's also covered the Philadelphia Eagles, so he knows the league well, and I want to get his perspective on if he knows if Matt Rhule might be getting fired anytime soon, since you guys keep asking me, and I tell you, I don't know when it's going to happen. And quite honestly, if it happens, Baker Mayfield's played so bad, it doesn't really matter who the head coach is at this point, because his team's just not going to be successful with that bad of quarterback play. But Baker Mayfield is also Matt Rhule's fault, because Matt Rhule has gone 0 for 3 as far as his opening day starting quarterbacks here in Carolina. Bridgewater did not work out, although he was much better than Sam and Baker. Sam Darnold, of course, was a train wreck. And so far through 4 weeks of the season, Baker Mayfield is playing at a Jimmy Clausen level, which is just sickening for me and you and all the Carolina Panther fans out there. And I'm sure for Matt Rhule, who thought that Baker Mayfield, who took the Browns to the playoffs, which is a minor miracle, could perform another miracle here in Carolina. Instead, he has torpedoed the season already in 4 weeks as the Panthers sit 1-3, and they're facing the number one defense in the league on Sunday, the San Francisco 49ers, and also a road environment as the faithful are likely going to take over Bank of America Stadium at 4:05 on Sunday. And how did the Panthers end up with back-to-back games against NFC West opponents, and both of those games are at 4:05? I think I looked it up. Like the Falcons, whenever they play their West opponents at home, they're playing at 1 Eastern. Same thing for Tampa. But Carolina got screwed by the NFL schedule makers, making sure that the body clocks for those West Coast teams will be A-okay when they come down here to Charlotte, which is just, come on, man. Like, give us a break here. So we're going to talk to Mike Kaye, get his perspective on what he thought the Panthers would be going into the season, what's wrong with Baker, when Rhule might get fired, and many other things as far as his thoughts early on in his tenure at the Charlotte Observer, working with Scott Fowler, the columnist, and, of course, Ellis Williams has been on the show a couple times as well there with the Charlotte Observer and covering the Carolina Panthers. So all that coming up here in just a moment after this word from our friends over at LinkedIn. And here comes the read. As you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so that your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus in on candidates with with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hirees versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers, as promised, Mike Kaye, the new beat reporter for the Charlotte Observer here in Charlotte. Mike, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, no, thanks for taking some time to do this. So first off, I've followed you a little bit. I know you were in Jacksonville at a period of time covering the Jags. You're up in Philly covering the Eagles. And then most recently, you were at the Pro Football Network. Just provide some background to our listeners who are now getting to check you out at the Observer covering their favorite team.
Well, I've been everywhere, man. Like it does kind of feel like this has been a winding road. Like you said, I started off in Jacksonville, covered the Jaguars for 3.5 years, the end of the Gus Bradley era, the AFC Championship run with Doug Marrone. Then I was in Philly post Super Bowl 52. Saw the rise and fall of Doug Peterson, another Doug, and then Coach Nick Sirianni's first year this past year. And then, I was with Pro Football Network during the offseason, covered the entire league, got a real feel for Panthers fans throughout. So just made it all the more sweeter to come here, come to this great city and this great town. And here I am.
Yeah, so what was that feel that you're able to get from Panther fans this offseason, as there's plenty of them who were not thrilled about Matt Rhule getting a third year, and then the talks of who they would replace Sam Darnold with, that ended up being Baker Mayfield. As we've seen through 4 weeks, things have not gone too well. But what was your thoughts just going to the season on the fan base and on this organization?
Well, I think this fan base is eager for a winner. I think when you look at how loyal they've been to Cam Newton and his performance throughout his time here, and then when you look at everything else since, it's been an interesting ride, right? And I think, Matt Rhule's a guy who I think is a good program builder from college, who had to take this leap. I mean, he was getting a ton of interest, and like a lot of guys who come from college to the NFL, so far it's been a pretty mediocre ride. But when David Tepper decided to give him year 3, the only logical road was to build in his image this offseason, and whether you like it or not, continue with him until the wheels fall off. And while the wheels are really squeaky right now, they haven't necessarily fallen off, and he is still here entering week 5.
They haven't fallen off. And I'm sure people right now are probably thinking, okay, what is this guy talking about? Because 1-3, not a great start. And everyone's asking me, when is he going to get fired? I don't know. I'm not David Tepper. And quite honestly, I don't know how you feel. Okay, so what? They fire him. How is that going to change the fact that Baker Mayfield is playing as the worst starting quarterback in the NFL? Like, does the quarterback play all of a sudden get better if you get rid of the head coach? The locker room seems to be behind him. I just don't really know how they benefit by getting rid of Matt Rhule at this point in time. So what is your thoughts right now? As I'm hearing different voices in that press conference. It seemed like you're the first one there on Monday who asked him if he was concerned about his job status, which he said he has confidence in himself, the team, and everyone's aligned that they'll always find a way to respond, which they're 5-18 coming off a loss during his tenure. So I don't know there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you asked that. I just released an analysis column about my thoughts on him being fired right now. I mean, if you fire him right now, it's really just for superficial purposes. It's not going to fill the stadium. It's not going to suddenly make the offense competent. Remember, he's not the play caller. That's Ben McAdoo. So it's not like you're suddenly going to get a better Baker because Matt Rhule just is off course. Remember, about 11% of the practice squad and 53-man roster are his guys from college. So you're talking about a good chunk of the roster that you can alienate if you press the panic button way too soon. And I think that kind of falls into play here. I mean, I think Rhule's done a really nice job of reinforcing by the way, this is a generic Denver shirt. Now that I see got it in an airport, I promise. There's nothing going on there now that I see that. But I think that this is a team that isn't at the point where Matt Rhule's lost the locker room or he's done anything to nationally embarrass the franchise based on what Tepper knows about him the first 2 years, right? Like, so they've lost 3 games by a combined 15 points. It's not like they're getting blown out every week. There are a lot of coaches who've been fired at like 0-5 and 1-6 and all that stuff, but really not a lot of guys who've been fired with 1 division win and a wide open division, right? Like if you look at the Buccaneers, they're 2-2 and they look like they have some issues scoring. You look at the Falcons, somehow they are 2-2, and I think they have the second worst roster in the league. Yeah. The Panthers already own a division win over the Saints, so they have the tiebreaker there. They're both 1-3. It would be absolutely foolish for David Tepper to go, yeah, let's give Matt Rhule a third year, a third offseason to build his brand, and then with the division right there to just fire him. That doesn't make any sense. And so I know fans want blood. I know fans want change, but you also don't want to ward off potential replacements, right? Like you don't want the image of having an owner who's trigger happy. You don't want a team that is going to potentially fall apart once the head coach is fired, because believe me, I've gone around the locker room. It does seem like the guys are still at least bought into each other. Maybe they're not completely sold on Matt Rhule. We don't know that for, nobody's actually going behind his back, but they seem to much be bought in as a team together. And I think that that's important. As I shake my computer. I think that's important as you head into this stretch of the second quarter of the season where you have, the 49ers who look beatable, even though their defense is very good. Yeah. You have the Rams who look beatable and their offense is struggling. You have the Buccaneers who look beatable at home. And then you have the Falcons who have always looked beatable and on the road. And so I think like if you're David Tepper and Matt Rhule can go 2-2 through that stretch, you're still very much in the division. And you're 3-5, but 3-5 is a much better outlook with the way the division has started right now, right? The NFC in general is wide open.
Doesn't look good.
Right. And like the only division where like there are 3 teams that look good are surprisingly the NFC East, where, the Eagles are running away from the rest of the conference for the most part. And then you've got 2 3-1 teams in the Giants and the Cowboys who I think will drop off towards the second half of the season. But for the most part, you've got an NFC that's kind of wide open, and to pull the trigger on a guy that you just had belief in, 6 to 7 months ago makes very little sense to me.
Yeah, it wouldn't make a ton of sense when right before the draft, David Tepper's coming out saying, let's preach patience. And then 4 weeks in the season, he fires the same coach. And not even 4 weeks, like really last Sunday, there was a report from Ian Rappaport that he was going to remain patient with Matt Rhule. And you bring up a lot of good points about the image of what it would look like if he fires Matt Rhule so quickly into the season. You're 1 game out of first place in a division that does look pretty open looking at Tampa. And I thought Tampa was going to come back a little bit to the rest of the field into the NFC South this year. I didn't expect New Orleans to get off to a 1-3 start. And certainly I thought Carolina could get off to a better start than they are right now. But it's not like it's completely over. But yet there's plenty of people who weren't bought into Matt Rhule coming back anyways that are certainly vocal, as I'm sure you heard at the game on Sunday and previous games, on their disdain for Rhule. I guess the main thing, just from my perspective, as someone who's just been around here, I think when you looked at Matt Rhule, year 1, no expectations at all. Year 2, you want to make some improvement. Did they do it in the win-loss column? No, but defensively, they were pretty damn good. Certain areas, red zone, takeaways, they weren't that great. This was always set to be the year where you could take over the division with Tom Brady, who retired and came back. Drew Brees is no longer there. Sean Payton, not a variable I think anyone thought was going to be missing this time around. And the fact that they're still trying to figure out a quarterback, I think is what really has people upset here in Carolina. And just from my perspective, does that kind of make sense to you?
Yeah, it's the ballad of Matt Rhule. He is going to sink or swim by quarterback play, right? And now he is sinking like a stone. And I think when you go to retreads, particularly retreads who have been middling at best, it's very hard to find a way to bring out the best in them. Yeah. 1, because either their confidence is shot, or 2, because they're not very good to begin with. And I think that's been part of the issue here is, You haven't locked down an offensive coordinator, you haven't locked down a quarterback, and it just kind of seems like they're going for the easy answer as opposed to trying to develop a player, where this outlook would be much different if they tried to develop, like, let's say, a Justin Fields, who I know is getting a lot of flack in Chicago, but not exactly, I mean, he still has intangibles that you really, really like, and maybe in the right system he could develop.
And he's young, and that's the thing. I feel like this organization has done themselves a disservice. Like David Tepper, he fires Marty Herney, or they mutually parted ways. And in that day, he says that Teddy Bridgewater basically said, "I'm done with this guy. You need to find a quarterback who win you Super Bowl. If you don't have him, you got to be in constant pursuit of that guy." All right, they had a deal in place for Matthew Stafford. He said, "I've played in 11 years in Detroit and won nothing. I'm not going to Carolina to continue losing." Makes the right decision, wins a Super Bowl. Deshaun Watson was never interested in coming here, whether it was pre or post the issues that he's had in his personal life. Russell Wilson didn't want to come here. So they land on Sam Darnold. That worked out how I figured it would, because Darnold was god-awful in New York. Make whatever excuses. The guy just can't play at a high level in this league as a starting quarterback. Then the next quick fix is Baker Mayfield. Like, they have never had what seemed to be a coherent plan at the position. And had they have drafted someone maybe back in 2021 when Fields and Jones were there, that might be able to buy some sort of goodwill that Matt Rhule could have had another opportunity next season, where now Baker flaming out at this point in time seems like he's done, unless magically Baker turns around what's been a performance only worse than, I guess, only better than Jimmy Clausen, Jamarcus Russell, and like Blaine Gabbert, according to QBR in the first 4 weeks of the season. I saw that on ESPN.com. So it's tough.
Yeah, it's tough when you're getting outplayed by Cooper Rush, right? Like, so,
yeah.
And that's tough, right? And if Rhule was here next year, probably Cooper Rush is that next guy, right?
Probably.
So
it's not even a joke. It like actually probably would happen.
But so I think that's the case. Now, remember, I'm coming from the national level. I'm coming from outside the market. When I was with Pro Football Network, they had me do a power ranking of head coaches, and I had him as the second worst head coach behind or in front of Dennis Allen with actual head coaching experience.
Wow.
And I think, it's tough, man. I've been impressed by the way he's able to communicate, and I do think he's extremely transparent and accessible. Which is good for my job, right? But I do think, there is something missing there. This team just doesn't have anything offensively. They don't have leadership. They don't have consistency. There's no complementary football being played. The stat about him being 1-20 something when another team scores over 17 points. By the way, 17 points is a good outcome for a defense.
Exactly.
And when you can't, score 18 points, let's say, regularly, that's bad. And it's happened throughout his tenure. It's not like it's just a McAdoo issue. It's not just a Brady issue. This is an issue that they have not been able to cultivate a reliable offense. And this defense is actually pretty good when they're not forced to play 17 minutes longer than the offense. And I just kind of think that's where they're at, right? I do think there's a good culture there. I just don't think that the product on the field works.
So what is it with Matt Rhule? Because you say there's something missing there, and everyone's saying fire Rhule. Like, what specifically about him is lacking and leading to all these losses? Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because you watch it defensively, like, they're good. I look at the roster, like, I just don't really see like the massive holes. Obviously, at quarterback, but outside of that, like, what really is it specifically about the head coach that has not led to the wins?
Well, I think he's an expert recruiter. I think he's a really good relationships guy. The problem is when you're a CEO head coach and you're not making the right CEO decisions, that can be a problem, right? Like if you hire a bunch of people that just don't work or are not good, you're going to be in trouble as a manager. And I feel like that's been part of the issue. Not that I think McAdoo is a sharp offensive mind. I don't think Baker Mayfield was the right, hole, the right circle to put in that hole, right? That square hole. And I think that's been a routine thing. I think Scott Fitterer has drafted relatively well, but then you have guys like Terrace Marshall and guys like that who can't get back on the field. for the sake of like Rashard Higgins or Shai Smith or Laviska Shenault. I mean, some of their evaluations seem to be very, very off from a front office to coaching staff standpoint, right? It just kind of doesn't seem like even when Matt Rhule had the wand and Scott wasn't here,
right?
It just kind of seemed like it didn't match up, and that's building up over 3 years. I mean, I think.
So you don't think they're on the same page as far as personnel, just from what your perspective?
No, I think I don't want to, because I don't want this to blow up.
Yeah.
The new guy is just saying that they hate each other. But I think just philosophically, I think they're on the same page. But in practice, I just feel like they're not. It's not working, right?
Okay.
Like if I told you, right, that my favorite ice cream was strawberry, right, and you got me. A vanilla ice cream with a strawberry filling. That doesn't mean that that's strawberry, right? That's not the same thing. It's what you think it could be the same. You think that you're adding that, right? Because what a GM and a head coach do is a GM is supposed to find guys that he thinks fits what the coach wants to do. And sometimes the coach has, plans of his own. And I just think like, with Marshall, it's such a bizarre thing. There are so many teams that would want, a 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver who seemed to have some upside.
Absolutely.
And now he's just inactive over special teams. Like, special teams are important, but like, this is a guy you drafted in the second round. I think when you look at certain guys, man, it's just it's perplexing why certain things are happening with this roster. And look, I mean. Again, it's not all on Rhule. It's not all on Scott. It's a mix of things. But Scott's been here for 2 years. He hasn't had the opportunity to hire his own head coach. So I think the heat really falls on Matt. And Matt has drawn the ire of a lot of people. And it's weird for a CEO head coach to draw that type of ire without being a play caller.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. And you bring like some interesting points there because I never really thought about just whether the guys that Scott's, bringing in really fit what Matt Rhule wants to do, and just kind of if there's a small disconnect there. I don't know. And I wonder now, like if Matt Rhule, because it looks like he's probably not going to make it, does Scott Fitterer then get the decision making? Because I've gone to people and said to them, like, okay, well, the biggest issue at the quarterback position, evaluation, obviously they've gotten it wrong. Also, guys just not wanting to come here. But also the man who forced him to make a change was the owner. And the guy who hired Matt Rhule was the owner, David Tepper. So he can fire Rhule. I just don't know what makes people feel confident he's going to find the right guy. I've just been curious to think, would Scott Fitterer be the one running the show there as far as bringing in a new head coach? Most
GMs get 2 head coaches. That's historically, Howie Roseman, who I covered, he got 3.
Yeah.
I think from... Tepper's proven to be patient, right? Like, but uniquely patient. And I think in order for, like, if you believed in Scott, you got to give him his own head coach that he kind of picks. You don't have to let him hire somebody, but he has to be in the room when that head coach is hired.
Sure.
I think that's very, very important. Because I've seen a lot of these two, like, separated direct report situations, and it just doesn't go well. Because then there eventually becomes a power struggle. There hasn't been a power struggle here as far as I know. But that doesn't mean it can't happen somewhere else. And I think what's interesting is there are a lot of really good young candidates. And I saw a report that Tepper would look into veteran guys, which I think retreads typically are just not worth the investment, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Right.
That said, there's Mike Zimmer out there. There's Dan Quinn, guys like that. There's Sean Payton, although I don't know if Sean Payton would want to come here. To me, you look at guys like D'Amico Ryan, Shane Steichen, Jonathan Gannon, Byron Leftwich, Mike Caldwell, who's doing really well in Jacksonville. There are guys that deserve their first shot, and I think Tepper's going to have his pick of NFL guys who deserve their first shot.
Yeah, and I would imagine it would absolutely be an NFL hire. Okay, so just a couple more here before I let you go, Mike. Looking at Baker, you bring up the scheme fit with him and McAdoo. is it really more just Baker's play that's holding them back, or especially the batted balls? We talk about that. Is there something Ben McAdoo can do to get Baker to play at a higher level? Or is it just Baker just not being able to execute his offense?
I just think that Ben really needs a pocket passer who can get the ball out immediately. And Baker just doesn't seem to be that guy. I think everything that's gone on this offseason has really hurt his confidence. And I think, at least from an on-field standpoint, I think we still see the bravado in press conferences. But I think from a confidence in the offensive line, a confidence in his arm, a confidence in his targets, it's tough when you get here 2 weeks before training camp. You learn a new system, a system that probably doesn't fit you as well as the previous one, because I thought he really worked in Kevin Stefanski's offense. And look, I think this is a pretty elementary offense. It's not a particularly difficult one to learn, but sometimes that can be easy for a defense to figure out. And I think when you have pass rushers, as my phone keeps blowing up, when you have pass rushers and you're able to stop them initially, they're almost always trained to put their hands up.
Right.
And I think the issue is getting the ball away, not double thinking stuff. There were some throws against the Cardinals that were really, really late. So they either led to incompletions or they led to minimal gains. He had some balls that floated on him a little bit. Like, it's just, his accuracy is just not good. And, it's crazy. I said this to Ellis Williams, my great partner. I was like, if I told you that 61.1% of his passes were completed in the Cardinals game, and that was the highest completion percentage that he had on the year, just watching every game, you'd probably be shocked, right? I mean,
right.
That's really, this was his worst performance. It's not even close.
Oh, yeah.
But he had 2 performances where he threw sub 50%, which is crazy, right? So I think it's one of those things where, again, you're putting a square peg in a round hole, and I just don't know if it makes sense. But then again, I don't know if Sam Darnold, like you said, is going to be much better. I don't know if PJ Walker is going to be much better. You're at the point where, do you really want to trade away future assets for another quarterback to come in midseason like Mason Rudolph? I just don't see the upside there. So the bed's been made. They have to figure it out. And frankly, if I'm an interim head coach, sure, I want the job because there's minimal pressure. But I also kind of want to get it at the right time, right? Where there's, maybe 9-10 games in the season. If I can win 5 or 6 games, maybe I impress Tepper into keeping me in an elevated role, or maybe I shine like Dan Campbell did with the Dolphins and eventually get my head coaching job situation down the road because of this.
Yeah, and I've guessed that Steve Wilkes would likely be the interim if they're in that situation. And you bring up the Darnold aspect of it. Like, wouldn't it make sense if Baker, because it's really going to be his play that dictates them getting that position where Matt Rhule is not going to make it, because Matt Rhule was going to keep his job if Baker thrived. If Baker was bad like he's been, Matt Rhule is going to lose his job. Wouldn't you then think that the interim, likely Wilkes, would probably go back to Sam Darnold, or even maybe PJ Walker just the rest of the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interim would go to Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
I think PJ, he's I don't want to call him a teacher's pet, but he's a guy that really vibes with what Matt Rhule wants to do from a leadership standpoint, from a culture standpoint. That's what he is. He's a culture setter. I think, Jansen's a guy who gets a lot of love as a culture setter. Like, you can see it. My first day there, I knew he was the guy, which is odd for a long snapper to have that type of voice.
And that's a guy they tried to replace.
Yeah.
Unsuccessfully, by the way.
Yeah, but see, that's, again, the evaluation process is, there's something off between process and practice, right? Process and practice are the two things that everybody talks about, the process of drafting guys, but once it's put into practice, that's the disconnect. And I don't think that's necessarily the wrong evaluation of a player. I think it's the wrong evaluation of how a player fits within a system.
Right. Okay. All right. Last one here for you, Mike. Just looking at it, San Francisco coming up, LA on the road, Tampa, just the next couple weeks. And what does this team have? I know it's converting on third down. It's all that. But what have you seen that makes you think that they can be able to turn things around here over the next couple weeks, especially offensively?
I think this team can score 23 points. And if they can score 23 points, I think this defense is good enough to to hedge and keep teams below that 17-point mark. But again, we have to see it, right? Like they think they have the pieces. I know that's not there's no BS there. They do think they have the pieces. I mean, this is an offense that has DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, a pretty decent offensive line over the last 2 weeks. And I do think, I said this about Ellis, but like Ellis said this earlier, and I totally agree with him. Tight end is such like a devalued spot for this regime. And it is just, it's, as somebody who has no emotional connection, who's got to be objective, I think it's ridiculous that this is their tight end room, right? Ian Thomas has dropped some passes, decent blocker, but I mean, he is the most forgettable starting tight end that I've ever covered easily. And, I think Tommy Tremble was overdrafted. I don't think he's particularly reliable. He's dropped some passes. And so it's like, what are you doing at that position? Because if you want to run 10 personnel with 4 wide receivers, go for it, because that's probably a more productive lineup.
Yeah, and they brought in one in Dan Arnold and traded him 3 weeks into the season because J.C. Horn went down, and C.J. Henderson so far has not provided nearly enough to justify that decision by Scott Fitter and this organization, but that is par for the course of the Carolina Panthers. Follow him on Twitter at Mike_E_K with an E at the end of his name. He is the new beat reporter for the Carolina Panthers at the Charlotte Observer alongside Ellis Williams and, of course, Scott Bauer, the columnist there at the Observer. Be sure to subscribe. It's your local paper. Why would you not subscribe and check out what's going on in your community? And, of course, you're the Carolina Panthers. Mike, thank you so much for your time today, man, and coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll take a quick pause here on Locked On Panthers, come back and wrap things up here on a Wednesday. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to BetOnline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again to Mike Kaye of the Charlotte Observer for popping on the show today. Again, guys, follow him on Twitter at Mike_E_K with an E at the end of K, so Kaye. Doing a great job of Ellis Williams and Scott Fowler covering the Carolina Panthers during this 1-3 start to the 2022 season. And I wanted to have Mike on because I knew he was coming from a national perspective, and I wanted to know what he thought from the outside looking in at this team, and now having been here, boots on the ground for the last 2 or 3 weeks, what his impressions were being in that locker room, talking to Matt Rhule, and then further evaluating the Carolina Panthers. And there's disconnect because we talk about it with Matt Rhule. I just don't really see what it is. We can talk about the game management kind of situations and the wasted timeouts that have happened. I really don't feel like it's happened that much so far this season. But guys like Terrace Marshall, who you have a first-round grade on, and then, like Mike brings up, he's not getting to play because of special teams, and Laviska Shenault, who pops on the roster and has 2 weeks and he's over Terrace Marshall, and Rashard Higgins playing over Terrace Marshall. And the first time Rashard Higgins touches the ball, he fumbles, and Terrace, even when he's out there against the Giants, didn't even see a target. So it's just weird to think that probably your second most talented wide receiver, who was a number 3 guy back entering training camp and dating back to the spring and early summer during mandatory minicamp, and was receiving all this praise of his improvement, how that guy is just not playing. And in the J.J. Jansen situation, drafting Thomas Fletcher in the 6th round, when a lot of people brought up how they could have taken Trey Smith. Well, really, it's Deontay Brown who they took over Trey Smith, and we've seen how that worked out. So they missed on their evaluations. He believes that Tommy Tremble was overdrafted. I brought up in the past that look at some of these past tight ends who have played at Notre Dame. Like, look at the guy right now, Michael Mayer. He's probably the best tight end. Well, he's one of the best tight ends in college football. Brock Bowers at Georgia might be the best one. Either way, that man is catching balls. He's a huge part of that offense at Notre Dame. Trimble was not that at Notre Dame. He did not do what Kyle Rudolph did, what Tyler Eifert did. He was not that kind of player at Notre Dame, and it's so difficult to think that he's going to come to the NFL and to be able to flourish at the position that is really, like Mike brought up, been neglected. And the only time they brought in someone who really was more of a pseudo wide receiver was Dan Arnold, and they got rid of him in 3 weeks into the season. And now they're trotting out Ian Thomas, and it's just not working out. So there's a disconnect. I don't know. It seems like Matt and Scott are on the same page. I'm glad that Mike kind of stopped me. I wasn't really trying to drum up any issues or any sort of controversy, but I was just curious. I want him to elaborate more on what he was talking about there, where and he brings up the strawberry ice cream situation. Like, all right, I like strawberry ice cream, but then you're giving vanilla ice cream, like strawberry filling and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe it's better, like, hey, I like brownies, but then you're gonna be like a black and white brownie. I don't know. Either way, it's just not working out there. I don't know why. And I'm just trying to. We talk about fire Matt Rhule, and like it's gonna happen. If he keeps losing, it's gonna happen. And me yelling about it is not going to do anything at all. David Tepper is not listening to this show. He does not care about what I have to say about anything. And he certainly does not care what the fans have to say about anything. He is going to listen to himself and give his coach, the guy he handpicked out of college, an opportunity to turn things around. Until I think mathematically they're out of it, it seems like Matt Rhule is going to be your head coach. It is up to you whether you want to sit here every Sunday and watch this team, and if you want to go on Twitter, on social media, and cry about it when the team loses. Like, you can do that. It's up to you. However you want to do it. If you want to be miserable and be upset every time they lose, and go be it. If you want to move on with your life and wait Matt Rhule to be gone, which eventually he'll probably be gone, because it's hard to think with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, they're going to be able to turn it around, especially looking at how Baker's played and the fact that he has no confidence. His accuracy is off and his footwork is terrible. It's just really an inevitability. And it does not do that much for the Carolina Panthers. It does not preserve the season and save the season by getting rid of him. It does not put him in a positive light if David Tepper preaches patience and then get rid of his coach when he's one game out of first place in the division. Like, the season, it's not over. Certainly, there's still 13 games left to play. I do understand, and I'm kind of there with you. There's not much reason to have much hope, especially when this offense has been terrible and you have the number one defense in the league coming to town on Sunday, and a lot of their fans will be packing out Bank of America Stadium. But so Mike, I thought, brought up a lot of good points, an outsider perspective. I get it. And I'm sure people are probably mad that I even mentioned that, like, it's not going to really solve anything by getting rid of Matt Rhule. And so Matt Rhule's gone. A lot of you won't be happy. And then what happens? He's gone and they keep losing. Then what? And do you trust that the next guy is going to come in and be the right guy? The hope is, like what Mike was talking about, what general managers usually getting to head coaches. I mean, for Scott, it's not like he came in with Matt. So really, I feel like the next time around would be his first head coach, the guy who can be in total alignment, as Scott is hopefully in there having a big say with David Tepper on who the head coach is going to be. But either way, David Tepper, as he's talking about right there, probably wants a better NFL coach, and retreads. We know how those typically work out. I'm not totally interested in that. I would love like a young offensive guy and then a new quarterback to go with that early in the first round if we can make that happen. I just don't really know. Right now, things are not great for Matt Rhule. I'm still holding out hope he can figure things out, because he seems, everything I've heard, seems like he's a good dude. We have not seen enough of that in the community. Certainly, he would be a better fit maybe in college. We'll see. But the guys are still behind him. The guys haven't executed at the level they need to. We all know that. But at the end of the day, as I continue to tell y'all, it comes down to the head coach. So as much as I can point to Baker playing terribly and the issues that are there, a lot of it, of course, falls on Matt Rhule. And he's the guy at the end of the day who's going to end up losing his job because of all of it. So we'll see how it plays out. But again, thanks to Mike Kaye. Go check him out, the Charlotte Observer. Subscribe to your local paper, folks. Come on, like, it's not that difficult. Go out there and do that. Support him, Ellis Williams, Scott Fowler, and all the other people out there working at the Charlotte Observer. All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, guys, make sure to check out the show Monday through Friday, wherever you find your podcast. Rate, review, subscribe. Check us out also on YouTube, where you go to Locked On Panthers and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, where every single Friday I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions. Participate in this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag, either at me or DM me on Twitter at Julian Council. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And I'll be back tomorrow with another edition of our Locked On NFL Crossover Thursday with the hosts, two of them, of Locked On 49ers. See you then.